Good evening, everyone. I'm Stan Pugliese from the History Department at Hofstra University. Welcome to the third and last of our Italian-American Experience lectures for the spring. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. This is actually our 25th year of the Italian-American Experience lecture series. And as always, I would like to thank the Hofstra Cultural Center, and especially our colleague this evening, Carol Mallison, who's handling the technical aspects of the evening, the director, Kathleen Collins, and the entire crew of the Cultural Center. I'd also like to thank the Association of Italian-American Educators and the president of that association, Cavaliere Josephine Maeta, and also our good friends at the Long Island Regional Chapter of the Italian-American Studies Association. And all of our friends that have been, very faithfully attending all of these sessions, whether it was, on campus the last 20 years or on Zoom the last 3 semesters. So welcome. We have a special guest host this evening. First of all, a couple technical matters. The film is about 90 minutes long. While the film is running, please turn off your cameras. If you forget, Carol will turn everybody's camera off and also will mute everyone. If you have questions that occur to you, or comments or criticisms or suggestions that occur to you during the screening of the film, you can put them in the chat, and we will address them at the end of the film. Did I forget anything technically? I would like to also, by the way, we should mention that this evening, like last month's session, is actually kind of silver lining of the Zoom pandemic. So my motto now is that when the pandemic hands you lemons, make limoncello. So last month we had Bill Papaleo, an Italian-American artist, join us from the Amalfi Coast. And today we have a guest who would have been very difficult for him to join us under normal circumstances. So that's it as a way of introduction. And I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Professor Greg Pell from the Italian Department at Hofstra University.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm here in Naples. No, I'm kidding. I'm in New Jersey. I wish. If any of you ever seen the film Eat, Pray, Love, that was loosely based on Elizabeth Gilbert's novel of the same name, you might have seen Julia Roberts' character say in the famous pizza scene, "I'm in love. I'm having a relationship with my pizza." Well, Matteo Troncone, our special guest and filmmaker this evening, takes this to a new level, where pizza is life itself, as much as it is a metaphor for making our passions and our sustenance. Matteo has perfected the art of living well, of arranging himself, as it were, the Arrangiarsi from the title. He is a wonderful writer, director, cinematographer, a first-rate photographer, especially nature photography. And he begins this fascinating and philosophical first-person travelogue with no job, no relationship, and no home. Living in his VW van on the streets of San Francisco, he decides that there's really only one thing to do. He needs to trace his roots to Naples and learn the secret of Neapolitan pizza. And that becomes really a whole philosophy of life. So I really hope that you enjoy this film this evening. As Professor Pugliese mentioned, you can put questions into the chat, as they occur to you during the film, or hold them until the end and just join our Q&A, our discussion with Matteo Troncone, our director. And I'd like to give you Matteo Troncone straight from his VW van. In the Mojave. Are you in the Mojave right now? I forget.
I'm actually in Big Sur, California.
Oh, Big Sur, that's right.
Yeah, Big Sur. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Stan and Carol, for doing the technical things for making this all happen. This is very weird. I'm not a Zoom guy. I'm looking at I can't help but look at myself. It's very bizarre. I'll just try and look in the camera. There we go. Where do I start? Initially, I just set out to make a film simply about Neapolitan pizza. It was that much of a moment for me when I first experienced it. I decided I had to make a film just about pizza. After my first expedition for filming, actually during my first filming in Naples, the film quickly turned into something much deeper, much, in my mind, much more interesting. And the film completely took a turn. However, pizza is still the through line. It's still the metaphor and the device that is used in this film. But as the title goes, it's Arrangiarsi, pizza and the art of living. So that's pretty much how I started to make the film. And there are two main themes of the film, which is there's always a way. There's always a way, and that's what Arrangiarsi is. The other theme I would say is that the obstacle is the path. So you might think that you're trying to do something, but there's a seeming obstacle in the way. But if you actually go with obstacle or go the other direction, you'll quite often will be bestowed with much more serendipity and much more gold. And this goes for anything in life, hence the title, Pizza and the Art of Living. So those are the two major themes. The film took me 8 years to complete. I lived in the camper van that I'm speaking from right now. I'm on a little photography trip, but I lived in this camper van for 5 years to make the film, and you'll see that in the film. It's in fact, the opening of the film is pretty camper van-y, but don't get discouraged. We'll go to Italy many times, and most of the film is actually shot in Italy, so and mostly in Naples. And that's pretty much. I'm just thank you for your kind attention, and I welcome any questions and comments about the film. I've screened it around many universities in this country, and it's I really like doing university screenings, especially. So there we
Perfect.
go. Thank you.
Perfect.
And see it.
Perfect. So yeah, so as we said, if you have questions that occur to you, questions, comments that occur to you during the film, you're welcome to enter them into the chat through Zoom, or just hold on to them for the end, and we'll join Professor Troncone for the Q&A. And as our dear friend Pellegrino da Cerno always says before his lectures, everyone fasten your seatbelts. Here we go. All right. Let's see.
Okay, Greg, are you back with us?
I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to handle the Q&A? First, let me say it was wonderful, Matteo, really extraordinary the way you wove the stories together, the images, and the metaphor of the pizza that could be turned into almost anything except with pineapples. But there were some questions in the chat. I don't know if you saw them, but I'm going to open it up to Greg to make some comments, and then he can ask the audience if they have any questions.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely just like to answer the first question from Maria W. Certainly, the first place to start would be precisely with Pino Aprile's book Terroni. The Pino was was filmed in Matteo's film, and he talks about the quote impoverishment of the South during the process of unification. So definitely, I would read his book Terroni. Yeah, absolutely. Matteo, did you want to look through some of the chat the chat questions? Let's see.
They went by so quickly, and we're not on Skype. I'm a Zoom newbie, so yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, I'll leave it to you, Professor Greg.
All right, so we have.
I'm happy to answer all of them. I could talk about this film. This is my heart's desire, is to share this film with people. So I love this. So I could go on forever.
Why don't we work backwards then? I just sent out the answer, the name of the book, Pino Aprile's book. What town did your father Pasquale immigrate from? This is from Annie Lanzilotto. Hey Annie, how's it going?
Ciao. Ciao, Annie. My father's family. He actually was born in Pennsylvania, in Erie, Pennsylvania, but his father was from Naples and had a pastry shop. Well, learned how to make pastries in Naples. He worked for 2 years for free for just room and board, and then he came into Pennsylvania and opened up a pasticceria there. cannoli, things like that. Yeah.
I see also, yeah, Professor Pugliese also mentioned Antonio Mattozzi's book, Inventing the Pizzeria, History of Pizza Making in Naples. Yeah, there are a few good books. In fact, in our food course, we just got done reading a wonderful article by Zachary Novak, which also discusses, it's called Folklore, I'll put it in here, Folklore, Fake Lore, and History. And it discusses the if anyone wants a copy of it, I just email me. I can send it to you. And it's definitely it talks about the false history of the pizza margherita, and how it really wasn't, as they mentioned in the film, it really wasn't invented for the Queen when she came to visit.
Yeah, that was 1889 when she came to this pizzeria called Brandi, which they actually make a decent pizza still at Brandi. But yeah, long ago, they had tomatoes and basil and mozzarella. So you're right. You're absolutely correct on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I see also Maria W. You mentioned Carla Gambescia. Yeah, we had her here. I can't remember now when she was at Hofstra. But she in her book, Italian University A to Z, she definitely talked about Arrangiarsi. There really is not a great translation for Arrangiarsi. I mean, obviously, you, Matteo, play with it as well. And at a certain point, we just give up. We say, we'll arrange ourselves. And in some ways, that's also the art of Arrangiarsi. Just say, all right, fine, we'll come up with something. But it's this notion of getting by, arranging oneself, managing, making do, living by expediency, the art of surviving. But I think you nail it in the film, because the art of living really, just because you're alive doesn't mean you're living. Just because you are finding a way to survive doesn't mean you're actually living life on your terms, and as some of the street artists talk about, living it freely. So it's a great tribute to the linguistic term, that really is born in Naples.
Thank you for saying that. In fact, well, my two favorite definitions of Arrangiarsi are the art of overcoming an obstacle, or the art of being resourceful. And the beautiful thing I love about, and I didn't mention this in the introduction because I thought we would just get on with the film, but is when you arrange, and you're in a situation and you have to get out of it, if you arrange in a good way, in those moments, you're not a victim. And to me, that was highly interesting, highly interesting to not be a victim. And that underneath all of that is the spiritual ramifications of not being a victim, being empowered by arranging. But it was actually the man who originally narrated this film, a friend of mine. His name is Peter Coyote. Some of you might know him. He narrates most of the Ken Burns documentaries, and he originally narrated this film. But before we had lunch, before he narrated it, he offered, by the way. But before we had lunch, and he heard about my film, and he said, I really think you should change the name of this film from Pizza and the Art of Survival to Pizza and the Art of Living, because these people are thriving. As you mentioned, Professor Greg, these people are really living life. And as you well know, in Naples, when you're living in that chaos, but also near those volcanoes, it's carpe diem. It's like, this thing could blow any moment, let's just live it up. And there's always a party in Naples. So I felt that also made the film, just changing the title very slightly, actually made the film emphasis be more positive and more hopeful and more inspiring in that way.
Did anyone have any questions that they wanted? Either don't forget, you can feel free to just unmute and ask, or you can just send them to the chat if you I see Annie's also asking about your spiritual journey. How does your Italian, maybe even Catholic, arrange you with various, you have Lakota Sioux influences, Sala and Buddhism, things like that, right? How do those? And by the way, I just wanted to point out, Matt is in the Bison right now. That is the VW van. So.
Indeed, the Bionic van. It's had many lives. I actually gave it just like Arrangiarsi, you had mentioned, Greg. You kind of like, okay, you have to just surrender. You get to a point where like, okay, I give up. I'm not even going to try anymore. I'm just going to surrender. And that happened with this van in 2018 on a way to a screening in San Diego. It just blew up. And I actually said, I'm going to move on. I'm going to get rid of it. but it just, you know, as Al Pacino said, they keep pulling me back in. So I'm in it right now, and it's been great to take trips and do photography. So, but I'm not living in it.
That's true. It's temporary. And by the way, his photos are fantastic. A couple of you mentioned also the fact that, you know, we learn about, you know, concentration camps in the north of Italy in this film, you know, during, you know, in the post-unification process, or actually technically it's still in the unification process. What was something that you learned historically or otherwise in this film that, you know, it was that eureka moment, it blew your mind, you know, something the equivalent of that fact that many people may have just discovered for the first time watching this film? Is there anything like?
That's a great question. In fact, speaking of Pino Aprile, I interviewed him for a little over an hour, and he's in the film, you know, just a few minutes. It's not I didn't want to make a History Channel film. I wanted the film to keep moving and to be fun and just crazy and, you know, real cinema verite. But I also did want someone grounded, very solid, with facts that are backed up. I mean, he did a tremendous amount of research. One of, you know, they even hand out a list, the shop where I met the tailor, how I got to Pino Aprile. There's this tailor shop, and they're the ones who introduced me to Pino, but they even hand out cards of all of the first things that Naples is responsible for. The first indoor plumbing, the first city in the whole world that had lights that were street lamps from gas. The first seismology studies. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So I narrowed it down to just a few things in the film. One of the things I had to cut was when they unified Italy and they took all of the industry and moved it up to Milano. One of the things that they did was they went to a town called Pietrarsa, which is right outside Naples. And this is where they were making all the trains for all of Italy. Well, they went in there and they killed everybody. They just point blank range. They just shot people. That was really surprising that it was that violent of an insurrection, to use the term. They were just killing people, and they just stole everything, even the silverware out of the palaces and stuff like that. So when I heard things like that, that was pretty shocking. My intuition was that this in fact had happened, because if you go to Naples, like you're right behind the palazzo, I can see. And, you know, right next door to there is the Teatro San Carlo, which is an incredible opera house. My God. I mean, it was very opulent. It was the third largest industrialized city behind London and Paris at its peak. So
I see Tiffany Acosta has a great question. Why did you choose pizza out of the endless amounts of gastronomic dishes in Italy? Really good question.
I think it chose me. I went to Naples like in the beginning of the film, where I had that funny little car. It all started when, you know, I just had this aha moment, this epiphany, like, oh my God, what have I been eating my entire life? I cannot believe they were doing, like, I've never really had a pizza my entire life until this moment. So it was just that amount of inspiration, and also just trying to figure out, how do they do this? I'm gonna figure out the secret to this. So that's really was kind of the genesis of the film. But as I said in the introduction, it changed very quickly, because I just followed what I was curious about with my camera. So I would film street artists and, you know, quote unquote crazy people, or just things that made me laugh. I would just film, and then the film just had a life of its own. And I think it's a way better film than if it was just about pizza. It's interesting, but not for. I wanted to make a nonfiction narrative film, a film that was nonfiction, but also had narrative, like movie-like aspects, like the dog montage, or like the woman in the beginning screaming at me, like, what the hell is going on? This is not Rick Steves we're gonna watch, right? So
in fact, you were talking about your style, you know, the narrative style you chose. Connie wants to know, how did you feel about putting yourself in the film as opposed to just standing behind the camera?
That's a great question. Thanks, Connie. I actually resisted it for a very, very long time. I didn't want to be this narcissistic person in the film. I didn't want to make it about me. Again, I just wanted to make it about immediately I saw that Naples was a character in itself, and of course pizza, and then the Arrangiarsi, just it happened pretty quickly. But my friends looked at my footage and they said, you know, this is much going to be way more interesting if we watch you arranging and you are living the film, because you already are living the film anyway. At that point, I was in my van, and to financially be able to make a feature film, even though I did everything by myself, I had to live in my van, and I didn't pay rent for 6 years. So, but I resisted it. But I remember my friend in Napoli, Andrea. He's the guy who had the preschool where I was sleeping, and then later in the tent. I spent 3 months in that tent, and that was in his yard. And he said, he goes, you know, you have to sacrifice. You're going to have to sacrifice yourself for this movie and put yourself in it. And I remember a teacher of mine said, you know, when you sacrifice, that word sacrifice, that actually comes from making something sacred. And so that gave me some fuel, some wind in my sails to put myself in the film, and just said, I don't, you know. And the way I edited myself was to just treat myself like another character, you know, show myself getting angry with Canon or food poisoning or whatever. I didn't try to make myself look good. That was very important in the editing process.
Wow. I think we have, you know, it's getting a bit late, and we have time for just two more questions, maybe. Another Tiffany question, Tiffany Acosta. In the film, we saw you go through many ups and downs. If you could, would you change or do anything differently in the film? I pretty much knew that's what you're gonna do.
No, it wouldn't be the same film. You know, people ask me if you had a big crew, if you had a lot of money, if you had all these resources to make this film, would you do? No, because it wouldn't be as immediate, and it wouldn't be an intimate film. When you have a film crew, people get a little like, oh, they're making a movie, or, you know, to get the interviews, they're not nearly as intimate. And the other thing about, I don't know if you guys saw this film by Gianfranco Rossi. It's called Fuoco al Mare, Fire at Sea.
Fuoco al Mare, yeah.
Fuoco al Mare, yeah.
Incredible. I mean, what a masterpiece. And at all times, because he shot it himself, you can sense that the director's behind the camera. He's kind of a character in a way behind the scenes. And that kind of happened with me too. I was just, and that was another reason why, like, I didn't try to point the camera. Like, sometimes you could see the camera would kind of droop because I would be intrigued or interested or engaged with somebody, and I wasn't paying attention to the framing. And so you can sense me at all times behind the camera. And that never would have happened with a crew. It wouldn't be cinema verite. It would just be, you know, another History Channel or whatever food show. Or
I just sent the name of the film, by the way, that you, fantastic piece of work, cinematography, by the way, and very politically important, socially important filmmaking. I think the last question of the evening, because again, you know, we're running out of time. We'd love to spend a lot more time, but Connie wants to know. Oh no, I'm sorry, Maria W. And I think many of us might have had the same, maybe confusion, if you want to call it that, about why you were shifting back and forth between California and Italy. You know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when people do criticize the film, they don't like those aspects of it. Some people do like it. I know it's kind of it can be jarring or can be confusing, but that's pretty much how I was making the film. I kept going back and forth. I went to Naples 9 times to make the movie, and I wanted to edit it in more or less in a chronological way, and that was the only way I could tell a linear story in kind of a non-linear way. But I had to tell the narrative had to be shaped a certain way, and by cutting back and forth. And I remember I had a friend of mine who told me, he's like, I loved it in The Godfather when they'd be in New York and it would be incredible, and then all of a sudden they cut to Sicily and you're like, oh man, and then you get engrossed in Sicily and then you cut back and forth. So it's also a way of, I think, not overstaying my welcome in any one location.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
That's great. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Matteo. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful questions. As you know, I put my, Matteo, Professor Pugliese just put Matteo's information on there. Yeah, stay in touch with him. You can contact him at his website. If you have any questions for me, I put my email in there as well, Gregory Pelt at hofstra.edu. Professor Pugliese and of course Carol is also who is involved here. If you have any other questions about that, we can all get in touch, and I will if you can always ask me, and I can get back to you with an answer or something like that. Even if Matt's not available, down the road. One last question? Any projects coming up? Any film projects coming up? Last one.
I'm actually my next film project will be it'll be nature oriented to some degree, but it'll be about another person, kind of a hero's journey in nature, but it'll probably be shot mostly in California. And I'm doing research right now on the script, and then just arranging the rest. So, but it'll be a narrative film, so I'll have a crew, and we'll make a regular movie. To do something like this is, I mean, it was fantastic. I wouldn't change it, but it's also pretty exhausting in every possible way. So as you can see, I have I have the Clooney, what I call the Clooney now.
Well, on that note, on that note, I'll definitely thank you again, all of you. Carol, thank you, Stan, thank you, Matteo. Thank all of you for joining us for this wonderful moment.